Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Hyperbolic Orbits. And if you're someone who is active in the global space community, I assure you that you have either heard, seen, or read about our today's guest today. I'm very happy to have Antonio Stark on our podcast today. He's a space strategist and he works on multiple aspects of space exploration all around the world. There's lots to learn from him today. And Antonio, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Hi, Samana. Very happy to be here with you and also to your audience members.
Thank you. Let's start with a question that I always begin with all the guests is everyone is curious to know how space professionals really begin their journey. So I would love to hear from you how your journey started.
Honestly, one of my favorite questions because everyone seems to have a slightly different version of how they got started. For me, it's actually one of the more mainstream reasons. I've just loved space from the very beginning. I started out by watching some anime about space, especially those from Studio Ghibli, and I kind of got really hooked on the idea of a whole civilization and humanity uniting and really going across planets and star systems, and that really kind of led me to look at more into airplanes and spaceships and rockets. And in high school, I did a lot of science projects that were related to space. I almost made a patent for a zero gravity toilet and a bunch of other things. I also designed a lot of space cities and space city design competitions. That led me to work with a lot of different organizations and conferences worldwide, and that gave me my first taste of working on space projects. And I've been in love ever since. So I've had a not short, but also not a too long space career, but I've been loving the community and the experience ever since.
Thanks for sharing that. It's true. Everyone has had a different career trajectory and with a very different starting point. So if we talk about one of your core expertise, that's in space policy. Space policy is something still a little unknown to a fair share of science and engineering students and professionals. So it would be really nice if you could tell us about the field of space policy and what it is that a professional like you really does in this field.
Right. So I actually work on the field of space policy and strategy. So it goes more to the broader stream of how space is being regulated and different policies are set up. And when I say space policy, this is actually quite different to space law. So legal side, I'm not a lawyer and I can't speak for any laws out there. I can read some, understand some, but I work more in the side of regulatory when the laws are just there to kind of really tell you what is legal, what is not legal. But that's true for a lot of European countries, a lot of the United States, North American countries, but a lot of the countries outside of those continents actually don't have enough laws to begin with. And for them, a lot of things actually start with basic policies, which may or may not be connected to certain laws that exist already. And these policies more or less guide a lot of companies and a lot of national strategies on where they should invest their resources. It allows countries to kind of like define a multi-year plan and to indicate how they want to develop such milestones and how they want to collaborate with industry or with other nations in such timelines. Unlike laws, which once they're signed, ratified, and then done are quite inflexible in some degrees, policies are actually quite flexible. They change a lot of times, especially when you have administrative changes. So I work with a lot of these policymakers, government agencies, and ministries in trying to figure out what kind of programs that they want to launch, what's their timeline, what's their budget, what kind of partnerships they want to build. So those who are in my social circle know that I travel a lot, and that's because my work involves a lot of partnerships building and ecosystem nurturing. And my work is really much that. Like I work with a lot of national agencies out there, not a lot of institutions, both research institutions and academic institutions, and trying to make sure what kind of projects we can do. Right now, I'm in the field of lunar transportation services and ecosystems. So I do a lot of lunar projects. But before, I actually used to work in satellite companies. So I was working on more on satellite policies, data, satellite data, using it for national security, climate change, etc. So a lot of economies depend on such satellite imagery, and I'm very thankful that I was involved in some of those discussions.
That's great to know. And from satellites, like low Earth orbit to going to lunar, cislunar economy, do you, I mean, of course, there's a huge difference in the kind of policies that are active in these kind of fields. So was it, how do you even span like that? Is it, it's not something, there's not a straightforward framework for you to follow, right? So how do you span across so many different things?
Right. I think I also have a very diverse background, so I'm very thankful that I have been able to like do a lot of research projects. So my research projects actually span everything from AI, machine learning, robotics, all the way to biology, space pharmaceuticals, space surgery, and of course satellites, lunar systems, etc. So I have such a wide portfolio because I was involved in a lot of projects. I was also thankful to have been involved in a lot of nonprofit organizations like the Moon Village Association, National Space Society, and the Space Corp Foundation, where I was part of multiple projects. And in doing such projects, I met a lot of agencies. So a lot of people think that so when people are actually trying to look out for new jobs, there are some people who say, hey, I am willing to learn, I'm willing to learn fast, which is a great asset, but also a lot of the employers are actually looking for people who are already well connected, who already know how things work. And I happen to have had a background where even in my earlier days of the career, I went to so many conferences. I really read and learned across the board. I could go to any of the tracks and learn something out of those tracks, be able to like hold a conversation with different levels of company representatives at different things. I literally had this opportunity where I was in, I think at IIC Bremen, where I was just talking to this guy about quantum key encryption and distribution using satellite technology, and he was like, how do you know this? Do you have a background in this? And I'm like, I don't. I actually just read a lot. So I'm just thankful that I'm a very avid reader. I'm a very avid learner. I read more than 50 books a year and also a lot more research articles and papers, even though I don't really have any higher master's degrees and whatnot. So that really helped me in just dipping my toe into a lot of projects. And that's really, really crucial in roles like mine. Like in roles like partnerships or in international policy coordination, you need such wide backgrounds. In some roles, you need a very, very deep understanding of certain verticals. I'm very thankful that I'm at an organization that values my breadth of research and breadth of opportunities. And I'm able to make connections and kind of like really initiate a lot of projects. But once that projects are really secured and matured, I can actually hand it off to people who know that particular subject matter better. So I'm at that level where I'm just connecting the dots for those around me and helping formulate projects together, connecting the right people, and then those who are much, much smarter than me can take it from then on.
That's a great lesson to learn. A lot of times I hear that people who work on a systems level, or let's say a little higher level, some people prefer to call them generalists, and they think that it's a little easy, it's just reading a lot of news and keeping up to date. But you're a great example of how much these kind of roles actually require you to go to the length and breadth of studying the material first. So while we speak about that, there is another aspect of your work which is related to space sustainability. You've been quite vocal through your research, through your speeches. Also, I've seen that you do involve your work with a lot of, engage with a lot of sustainability aspects of space exploration. So if I ask you, having worked with so many different kinds of organizations, which part of sustainability is currently the space industry really focusing on?
The space industry focuses on whatever side that they want to focus on, and this is because space industry itself is also really huge. The area of sustainability that I personally focused on is more on country representation and on sustainability across a long-term economy. So This is also because of my background. So I was born and I grew up in Korea. And when I was growing up, Korea was not a leading space nation. Now, if you go and ask anyone, Korea is indeed a very leading space nation with a very big budget, one of the leading space agencies in the world. But when I was growing up, that was actually not the case. I was looking across the ocean a short while, and you have Japan. A long while, you have the United States. The other side, you have China. India was and still is, honestly, to a lot of respects, very much ahead of South Korea in terms of space exploration and technology. So, I, when I was around going at international competitions and conferences, people are like, Korea, we know the country, we don't know any space technologies from your country. There's no like notable companies in space that you will find from Korea. Even then, maybe there's some now, but there was definitely not a lot then. So I really care a lot about companies being represented at multinational forums, and especially when you're building these sustainable ecosystems. And and also because of my background in policy, I really, really am very intentional about making sure that any policies that are written about outer space exploration and research utilization can take into account the diversity of countries that we have on Earth and how those populations should be represented out in space. That is not just to say about lunar systems, that is, of course, about Martian systems, about asteroid mining, but also it is immediately about our orbits as well. Our orbits are getting incredibly congested, and now there are more policies about satellites deorbiting, about communication bandwidth, and about how these satellites are tracked and monitored, etc. And there's new regulations put into place about how these satellites should be equipped to handle such things. And a lot of the companies that can actually, add some more budgets to add that kind of sensors or deorbiting technologies onto the satellites are from developed countries. A lot of the satellites coming from emerging countries don't have the budgets, don't have the know how to do so. It doesn't mean to say that I agree that satellites should go up without a clear deorbiting strategy or a clear communication strategy, but the developed countries have had a lot of years of experience where they could literally just toss a can into orbit without really like having to worry about it. And now a lot of the companies or entities coming in now, they need to think a lot more, magnitudes more about how they should operate their satellites before they're even legally allowed to launch one. And this is on one side a very rapid learning curve that is great for some people. It allows them to really track their evolutions up high. But in the other sides, it does put a lot of these companies and entities at disadvantage when you are trying to compete at the international market. So I really hope that there's some sustainability factor out there that recognizes that some entities are slower and have started at a much later pace than the other runners in this international race. But we are giving them some time so that, again, sustainability can be maintained when there is sufficient diversity in the ecosystem in terms of the suppliers, in terms of the demands, in terms of the manufacturers, the whole supply chain. This makes us resilient. This makes us sustainable. Having more supply, having more options, give us that resilience. So I hope that I'm trying to make sure that there are policies out there that improves such sustainable metrics out there so that in the long term, we can really have that sustainability in orbit, in cislunar ecosystems, and for deep space exploration out into Mars and the asteroid belt and beyond.
That's fantastic to know. That's why I asked, what is the space industry focusing on? Because sustainability is not one thing, and engineers focus on something, business owners focus on something, and it's wonderful to know that as a space policy expert, you acknowledge and actively encourage the fact that we need more resilience in the ecosystem through diversity. So I'm very, very happy to hear about that. Now, when we speak about diversity, there's a little there's a question that I wanted to ask you for quite some time, honestly. It's that anybody who follows you on social media knows you love meeting people And anybody who has met you knows that you're a wonderful, warm, and friendly person. And what I want to ask you is that being a part of the global space community, you come across, you become friends with, become colleagues with people from all over the world. So, how has this multicultural association helped you kind of enrich your own life?
It enriches the scope of understanding and scope of what we can do. Again, every entity comes with their own perspectives of how they do things. And sometimes this is good. Sometimes it makes them efficient because they will do things the way they've done it, and it's a one line. But every organization needs some people who can see beyond that perspective. I do believe that wide perspectives is an asset for everyone, but I also don't like it when some people try to shame other people saying, "Oh, you don't know this, you don't know that." That's not really I don't think that's a professional way to address it. Like some people simply haven't had the privilege of being able to be exposed to a wider of a variety of cultures. I am really privileged in that I have a very strong passport that has allowed me to travel very frequently and economically to other countries to attend so many conferences. And I'm very humbled when I see other people who has attained the same amount of knowledge and attain the same amount of perspectives, even without even being prevented from being able to travel so widely. So um, I have traveled to a certain degree, but I know that doesn't give me like any right to actually like assume anything. I just know that I have so much more that I need to learn of this world. So far, it has given me a lot of strengths in being able to talk with other people. Even for the same projects, they do it differently. Even for the same engineering, like aerospace engineering, things how they do it in France is different to how they do it in UK, and that's even still within Europe, and that's still very radically different to how they do it over in India, and that's also radically different to how they do it in Australia. Some of it is really cultural, but the other sense is actually really economical. About how the economy is driven, how the supply chain works. I had a project where I was trying to send a rover over to the middle of the Hawaii for an analog project, and we couldn't send some battery components because there were international regulations. And a very easy solution is you just don't ship the battery, you just buy the battery at the local, which we could have done when we were trying to do the same thing in Europe, but we actually can't do that in Hawaii because they don't have hardware stores that just sells engineering things normally, like in Hawaii. So we had to like come up with something else. We ultimately couldn't. The timeline just we could not figure out a way to acquire the required components at that time, even if it was like in the US, it just happened to be in Hawaii. And the same thing happens in India, same thing happens in Australia. The procurement decisions differs, how the national budget is processed is different. Whether an agency is an independent agency directly under a president or if it's under a ministry still has very, very big ramifications about the amount of budget they can give or how long ahead of an approval process that they can manage for a certain project. And this is honestly, no one will teach you. Even if you do 10 years of engineering at Princeton or Stanford, no one will actually go about and teach you, hey, this is how we do things, aerospace projects in India or like aerospace projects in China or in Australia. No one will tell you this is things that you only learn either by working directly at these companies, which is impossible unless you're like someone incredibly exceptional. The other way is you just need to know a lot of people who are open enough about these problems to tell you because these are all problems that people need to solve. Engineering problems are really embarrassing details for a lot of companies, and they won't tell you about these things unless they trust you as someone that they know that you're not gonna like tell other people about it, and they actually trust you to actually give them help. I'm very fortunate that some people have believed in me, that I am such a person, that I'm someone who can make connections, and I really do try to be. When I go out to conferences, even when it's not my job, I try to make people connections. If I see a problem, my immediate reaction is to try to see how I can help provide a solution for it. So people come to me with their problems that I didn't know about before, in cultural backgrounds that I didn't know about before. My friends in India, Malaysia, and in Indonesia, and the Philippines ask me, how do you know these? We didn't even know about that. And that kind of really says a lot of people are not forthcoming with some of the problems that they have. And the diversity of experience that I've had just really allowed me to be open and not judge people when they come up with problems, because a lot of times, especially in some countries, I know that they are more in a stance of, hey, this is how we do it. They say that they're teaching you, but they're not really teaching you if they are basing their lessons entirely on their own ecosystem. When I do my partnerships, it's all about, okay, this is how they did it, but this is also why they did it, on how they did this. And if we are trying to apply the same outcomes, the same solutions and benefits to your economy, to your supply chain, to your manufacturing practices, these things can change if these objectives can still be the same. There needs to be someone who has that understanding, that in-depth understanding of why these things came about. And that analysis was only available to me because people were kind enough to let me know that this was how and why they did it. So many people would be able to tell you how they did it, but they won't be so willing to tell you why they did it unless they trust you. And again, I'm so blessed that I have so many friends who trust me with such details that allows me to like really go and put these perspectives to a greater value.
Really, really glad that you shared this point. It's a little, space industry is different in many aspects, but this is one thing that I've also noticed from an early age, is that it involves a lot of international corporations working with multinational teams. And honestly, rockets, satellites, or be it any kind of space technology, you don't have a lot of data points that you follow while building a system. So I've seen a lot of engineers feel very embarrassed to say that, oh, uh, we are trying, but our company hasn't been able to achieve. And um, I just want to, if anyone is listening, I just want to say that it's completely okay, because what they are doing is insanely difficult, first of all. And secondly, a lot of the resources to learn from, there's a lot of, I won't say gatekeeping, but things are a little inaccessible for very good reasons. So, in spite of that, to have that courage to build space systems is, I think, highly commendable. So, I'm glad you raised this point. And if I can ask you one major last question, is that you I've seen you keep, like, young professionals and students. I've seen in some events you really keep the energy alive in events, be it with your selfie camera or whatever conversations you have with people. So I want to ask you, for someone who is just, let's say, starting out in the space industry, or maybe preparing for a career in the education sector, or let's say someone who is in a different industry but trying to switch to space, what kind of advice would you give to such young people who are still a little scared?
I would like to say them definitely find a role model in the space, but also don't compare yourself too much to other people, because space is a very, very big field. A lot of people think that space is, I mean, in some degree, space is a very small field. Like, the people are very well connected. Honestly, if you go out, you can find every conferences, I find like dozens of people that I have met and known already, or just like a few bridges across. People will know you. At the same time, it is still a very diverse industry in terms of the roles, the industries that you can do. There is engineering, there is legal, there is business. In engineering, there's so many subcomponents, and also in the fields itself. Even in satellites, if you do communication satellites, Earth observation satellites, synthetic aperture, remote sensing, satellite manufacturing, satellite operations, ground stations, subcomponents, larger components, the size of the satellites, launch vehicles, propulsion systems, engines, fuels. There's so much that you can do. And I know that it's easy to be overwhelmed into thinking that space is this one thing. If you're looking only at mass media, it is very easy to think so. It is very easy to think that unless you're working on rockets, it's not really good. Unless you're working at a US company, it's not really cool. That's not really true. And this is like true, like if you look at SpaceX, space is like the fact, like the company that a lot of people want to work on. If you just look at SpaceX 10 years ago, SpaceX was a company that people were trying to avoid. Governments were trying to avoid space. Like people, SpaceX to like go rent a truck, camp out in Capitol Hill just to make themselves heard. And those are so my advice to people is that of course if that is your dream, if you want to do what SpaceX is doing right now, and if you are changing your career into space in like the next 1 to 3 years, go for that. But also, if you are looking for a company that you will to be working in or even start yourself 5 years from now, then stop comparing yourself to SpaceX or any other company that it is now. Look at those companies, how it was 5 years ago, and then you'll actually find so many other companies out there. There's so many companies, like even if you just look at India, there's a lot of startups out there that have had amazing growth opportunities. If you look at LinkedIn, if you know the right hashtags to put into and follow those hashtags, those give you so much more value than following, content creator accounts. Content creators is still awesome, by the way. They do a great job really communicating basic science out into the world. But if you really want to learn about business, then you can really just push in some hashtags you want to know about onto LinkedIn, and you will see people doing the work right now at the job, posting about their work, and that really gives you an insight about what they will do. You do not want to be SpaceX's 1,000th or 2,000th employee. You want to be SpaceX's 5th or 10th or 30th employees. And those companies are going to be out there on LinkedIn talking about their prototype, talking about the shitty 3D model that they just built. But those are the companies that you want to listen to. And those are the people you want to meet at conferences and say, hey, I know you. I've talked with you. They are happy to talk to you. I've had actually chances to interact with SpaceX's leadership when I was a university student. I actually met Jeff Bezos when I didn't even know who Jeff Bezos was, and no, not a lot of people did. And that's when I actually first met him. This is when you want to be involved in the space sector. Go out, really reach out, spread your network. If you have things that you're interested in, of course, go and follow the accounts and the influencers and whatnot. That's the basic. That's the basic. But if you want to do something extraordinary, you got to do something more that no one else is doing, and stop comparing yourself to the top, because those are people who have made it. Those are people who are not just gifted but also really fortunate. There were so many Elon Musks out there, but fortune has been such a good value, and people kind of discount how how fortunate some people were to have their company successfully launch. That's why we have serial entrepreneurs and whatnot. Don't don't look so much on successes, but also kind of like look into why certain companies failed. Why did Virgin Orbit fail? They were on a really good trajectory, but they failed. Vast had some difficulties. Axiom had some difficulties. They had to overcome it somehow, but they're getting there. They're getting there. Look into those. If you can really recognize how some companies have failed and some companies showed up, that really gives you an understanding of where you want to put yourself in that ecosystem. The people at the top are only looking for people at the top. If you know you're not at that level yet, if you're wondering if you are, you're probably not. Then you really need to start from that level. And there's so much resources out there. If you are, don't be ashamed. Don't discriminate against yourself. Don't compare yourself to those who have already succeeded. A lot of them will say that they worked hard, and that's true. They have worked hard, but again, they were also really, really fortunate. I am extraordinarily privileged. Extraordinarily privileged. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm trying to tell people that's how I am. Don't compare yourself to me. Really find role models who have succeeded in that field with similar background to yours, or in worse background than yours, but have succeeded despite of it. And that is your benchmark. Find role models like that, and then work from there.
Wow, this is the reason why I started this podcast. I'm not someone who's very consistent, who'd love to be, but I'm not. But I know that even if I can interview one person, have a conversation with one professional like you in the space industry, the kind of practical insights that we can get from you is I don't know. There is no comparison to that. So I want to thank you. I'm really grateful that in spite of your really busy schedule, we could do this, and you shared so much with us. I'm really grateful to you, Antonio. Any last words you would like to share with us?
Uh, Keep on going out there. Space is a very big field. It's a very inclusive field. Please, um, I hope you are not uncertain. Space is an incredible place to be. And it's okay to take steps away. Like I have seen people who are passionate about space. I'm someone who's been passionate about space and who's been involved in space all my life. But also, there's so many other people who have had space as their passion, but because they need to make a job, make a living, they go out into other fields. They work in the petroleum industry, they work in the oil and gas industry, they work on aircraft mechanics, they work on something else. But then they come back. As long as you kind of like know that this is your core, this is your true calling, you can always work towards it. You can always learn from it, but there's always opportunities for detours. Just keep that dream in mind, and how we say it in the industry is that we'll see you at the top, we'll see you in orbit, we'll see you out of this earth.
Thank you so much. This is incredible. To everyone listening, I want to thank you for watching this episode today. I'm sure you already either follow Antonio or you're going to follow Antonio from now on, because he wherever he travels, he always shares that. He shares a lot of practical insights from the space industry, and there's a lot to learn from him. Thanks for watching this episode today. And for if you're someone who is not in the space industry yet, but you are a tech professional and you would like to make a switch, I have just started and published an online course called Transfer to Space, and I've started the enrollment to that online. It's a self-paced course. I'm going to put all the links in the description and the comments on both the YouTube and Spotify platforms, and I hope you go check that course out. Until then, Antonio, thanks a lot. We look forward to learning a lot more from you.
Thank you. And
Thank
yeah, I'm open on LinkedIn and Instagram. I'm sure you'll put them somewhere somewhere down
Yes.
there. So always happy to be reached out and have a convo as well.
Yes, I'm going to add all your social links to the description itself so that people can find you, follow you. Thanks a lot for watching this episode, and I'll see you in the next one.